This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. I hope you enjoyed this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. Hello and welcome to today's Critical Thought. Before we begin, thank you to 784 subscribers here on YouTube. We lost a few over the last day, but that's always to be expected. If you've been enjoying the content here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel, be sure to, of course, subscribe and let your friends know. As we make our way up to 1,000, I decided to sweeten the deal. I've been preparing some mega ideas for the big Let's Play do when we hit 1,000 subscribers. A friend was asking me about this a few days ago. So, starting today, and then when we hit 800 and 900, I'm going to give you guys a preview of these big ideas. And these will be the ones you will vote on when we hit 1,000. So for today's preview, that's going to be the intensely complicated and big game Crusader Kings 2. Possibly the best-selling or most recognizable game from Paradox Software. They are known for some of the most challenging grand strategy games released. So if you pick this one for our 1000 playthrough, or our 1000 sub playthrough, I will attempt to play through the game from start to finish and see if we can get a win. This will be extra interesting because I have not been able to actually learn these games before. And if we can succeed, we may develop a first-time player's guide for this game for other people to enjoy. Now, for those of you who know about the Patreon campaign for Game Wisdom, you have until the end of October if you would like to lock in some early bird pricing. This will get you the rewards at a lower discount. After October 31st, the pricing will go back up to the normal prices for all of our reviews. I'm going to need to take a drink now because my allergies are extra bothering me today. Now, speaking about Crusader Kings 2, that's a good segue into today's Critical Thought. And that's going to be on the concepts of non-linear and emergent gameplay. We've been talking a lot about different kinds of game design over the last few months, and of course on GameWisdom.com. Procedurally generated content, randomly generated, hard-coding, or hard-coded, etc. But nonlinear and emergent are two terms that, unless you've been studying game design or follow game developers, you may not have heard too much about. We'll start with nonlinear. Nonlinear design is essentially that there is a start, there is an end, but everything in the middle is up to you to decide how to proceed. Do you want to be aggressive? Do you want to be stealthy? Do you want to use strange, crazy powers to get through things? It's entirely up to you. And these games are some of the most complicated to build as you're essentially designing multiple options and sometimes options within options to get through. Some big examples of nonlinear gameplay would be stuff like Dishonored, Thief, Deus Ex, and Crusader Kings, which we'll talk more about that in a minute. When it comes to nonlinear design, it's really about creating a set of tools or a set of options you want the player to use at any given moment, and then building your levels and your design around these multiple options. If whatever you give the player should be a viable tool. If you give the player the option to talk their way through combat or talk their way through levels, then that should be an option at almost any given time. If there's stealth options, etc. The problem and when nonlinear gameplay tends to fall apart is when developers don't give each option its own due. When Deus Ex Human Revolution was first released, there's a major complaint about the boss fights and how they were all designed around combat, even though stealth and dialogue were potential options in the game. And it took them, I think, like a year, maybe a little bit more than that, to release the director's cut that put in stealth options and alternative means of getting around the boss fights. But that is one of the issues that you have to deal with. A famous example of a game that did this right would be the original Fallout, where, of course, you could talk your way, shoot your way, or other options through just about any of the game's major situations. And the game's final boss fight even allowed you to talk your way through it. And if you were good enough, you could convince the boss to basically kill himself or end his goals for domination. With nonlinear gameplay, we definitely have seen this in the strategy genre. Again, Crusader Kings, Hearts of Iron, Europa Universalis, and of course Civilization are examples of what you can see in nonlinear gameplay. While your tools may be the same each time, how the game plays out is going to be different. And that takes us to the other term. This is one of those holy grail concepts for game developers, much like infinite replayability. When it comes to emergent gameplay, we're referring to a game that essentially presents itself differently each time, depending on what is going on in the game. Think of it as having a storyteller watching your game and changing things as you make choices and as the AI plays. So what happens is, how the game is going to play out, no one knows. One time you may have a very easy experience. Next time maybe a war with a faction will set things down a different path. Maybe you'll use diplomacy. The point is, and where nonlinearity and emergent gameplay sort of deviate, is nonlinear gameplay presents things in, again, several tracks. You have your action track, you have your stealth track, you have your platforming or other track, and the game is built around each one of those. Emergent gameplay gives you a set of tools. Think of these as like toolkits for you to do, and depending upon what you choose, the game will adapt or change accordingly. If I decide to build a dam and actually control water, I could maybe set up an alternate power source that developers never would have envisioned. Games such as Minecraft or Factorio can also be examples of emergent gameplay, with how the gamers and people who played, who really explored those systems, built things that were entirely out of the scope or out of the decision of what the developers intended. And this is what makes emergent gameplay so exciting. You're essentially building a toolbox or building a story crafting center, and then the player and the AI will essentially create the story on their own. You'll never know what each game is going to be. And as I said with Crusader Kings and Europa Universalis, those are brilliant examples from Paradox of emergent gameplay. If you've never played one of their games, Crusader Kings 2 is a grand strategy game, but features so many different events and situations that can happen that no one knows how one game will play out. Depending upon how aggressive you are, depending upon what happens to your dynasty, you can have completely different games. And these kinds of games are what Let's Plays have really grown from. I remember reading stories, people playing Galactic Civilizations, even stuff like XCOM in its own sense can be a form of emergent gameplay. But the point is, these tools, you're not building hard options for the player to use. You're building a collection of mechanics and systems that can then be exploited or grown in completely different ways each time you play. And if you want to look at a game that was striving for that kind of emergent gameplay, look no further than No Man's Sky. As we know, No Man's Sky was built around this concept that the entire universe was going to be different. Every planet would have a completely different ecosystem. You can do different things with it and all that. Now, of course, whether or not they succeeded, that's another critical thought easily. But the idea that the game has no, hard foundation how it's going to play out is what we're looking at in terms of emergent gameplay. And as I said, this is one of those dream concepts from developers. Now, to get into more detail about what emergent gameplay is and how you design it, we don't have the time today to do that. I would really need like an hour or two, and maybe to somehow trap Will Wright in a cage and get him here to talk with me if we want to explore Emergent gameplay more. But for those of you watching, do you have any examples of Emergent gameplay that you've seen? We can even see this in linear games where the AI may adapt or change depending upon the player's options. So if you have any examples, be sure to let me know in the comments below. We'll wrap things up in like the next minute or so, but we've been seeing more pushes towards non-linear gameplay over the years, especially as the technology has evolved to support systems and tools rather than just hard-coded mechanics. A famous example of this would be from Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. One second. It's one of my favorite games, and what they did was allow you to design vehicles that you would use for any of the game's puzzles or situations. So there's one level in a coliseum where the game asks you to make a land vehicle that can jump over barricades, and whoever vehicle is the fastest wins. But what clever players decided to do was build a land vehicle, but have the attachments to separate into an air vehicle. Yes, you can build transforming vehicles in the game. It was awesome. So what we did was, we start in our car. The second the race begins, we detach our wheels, fly off, and then we just fly low enough to hit the beacons over each barricade. So we essentially created an example or solution that the developers weren't intending on doing. And that's where this kind of non-linear and emergent gameplay really comes into play. Where a developer presents you with a series of tools and options and then just says, go nuts, and the game will essentially decide what you're doing. Now, one example that was starting to get there that I want to touch on is Left 4 Dead. As you know, Left 4 Dead had the AI director who essentially governed the enemies that would spawn, when attack waves would begin, and even what items would appear in the game. It was a good start, but it wasn't, I think, complicated enough, or wasn't as involved enough to really develop unique situations. At most, a level may have 2 to 3 variants, and that's being generous. But that is kind of the other idea behind emergent gameplay. You have a director or someone behind the scenes essentially picking and choosing how the game will evolve based on what your actions are and what the AI's actions are. If you want to see this in a smaller scale, you can look at the games like Dwarf Fortress and RimWorld, where the game will decide what events will throw at you, and then the world will change accordingly. So in one game, maybe there will be an acid rain event that will force everyone inside and affect how you grow food or support yourselves. Maybe in another game there's a rebellion in the country next to you, and now you have to decide whether to support them or try and take them over for yourself. Again, it's about building a series of tools and options and not just hard-coded solutions. So it's not like every time there's a war, you're going to do the exact same thing. Or every time you run a country or run a civ, that this one strategy is going to work every time. And again, it's not easy to build non-linear and emergent gameplay. And it's also why the games that manage to get it to work are considered some of the most highly regarded games ever made. But we're going to wrap it up here. Like I said, thank you to 784 subscribers. Be sure to, of course, like and subscribe. And be sure to keep in the back of your mind those big ideas for when we hit 1,000. Like I said, check out the Patreon campaign. You have until the end of October to lock in some early bird pricing. With all that said, I am Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoyed today's critical thought and post on Game Wisdom. I will see you all tomorrow with more great content. And as a special note for those of you watching this on Wednesday, be sure to check out our live play tonight. If you miss it, it'll be set up here on YouTube in a few days. Excuse me. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all then with the live play and more content tomorrow. Take care. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.